is the first Friday of August, and here we are again for Sexy First Friday. I'm just waiting for Sam to join, and so I can invite her in. And today it's all about aging and sexuality, and we are super excited to be talking about this topic and getting an idea of like how that kind of affects the sexuality as well. I'm gonna see if I can find her on here and make sure she will pop up here in just a minute. Okay, there we go. I accepted it. Here we go. Here is Sam. Welcome, Sam. It went really quick again, but I guess we were just here 2 weeks ago, were we not?
How are you doing today?
Doing well. A little bit like just tired because I've been like, my husband's had some like work events and things going on. But I am super excited to be back talking about this topic on aging and sexuality. I thought we would just go in really quick, introduce ourselves again. We've been doing this for, is this episode 8 or 9?
I think.
Wait, okay, so this is the 8th time that we're doing this. So many of you already know who we are. So I'm going to give the really quick introduction to who I am so that we can get right into it, because this is a really big topic and we're going to have to go very quickly and just like on the touch points. But my name is Lindsay Frazier. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, as well as a certified sex therapist and an IA accredited professional out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I specialize in relationships and sexuality. So that is me. How about you introduce yourself quickly as well, Sam?
Okay. Sam E. Greenberg. I'm a sexuality researcher and Enneagram coach specializing in sexuality and relationships. And my research currently is on the Enneagram types and sexual desire and expression, as well as dominant instinct and sexual desire and expression, how they overlap.
So today's topic is kind of a big one, and one that I feel like is really important for us to be talking about, which is about the aging and sexuality process. And one thing why, and actually this was the #2 requested thing when we were doing our special edition. So it was BDSM and it was aging and sexuality. And this is what the people that follow us voted the most for. But to me, it's also such an essential topic because we sort of have this idea that as we age, we become non-sexual beings. And so, you know, I don't know if that age is depending on how it happens, but it's like, you know, as you approach 50 or 55 or 60 or 75 and kind of beyond, we start to sort of think of people as non-sexual beings. And the really interesting thing is, so I did social work before I was a therapist, and like one of the things that happens a lot with the older population is like STDs get passed around nursing facilities. And I think what's interesting about that is because they don't think about protection anymore, right? Because they can't get pregnant. But what we do know is that people of all ages desire sexual connection. Actually, sexual desire and connection doesn't change over time. It's actually more about how our bodies function and work. And actually, Sam had a really interesting thing that she found out through the research about this as well. And so why don't you share that, Sam?
Okay. So my study has nothing to do with aging, but I did collect demographics on age because I wanted to be able to control for age, which I did do, meaning that my results hold true across the lifespan. But just for this Sexy First Friday, I did some digging into the data, and it turns out I divided the participants into, you know, younger and older folks, and it turns out that the older folks have exactly identical desire levels as the younger folks, or at least that's what they're reporting. And that's based on questions around like, how often do you think about sex when you see an attractive person? How strong is your desire to have sex with them? You know, how important is sex to you? How important is it to actualize your desires? Older people are saying it is just as important. They have just as high of desire as younger people. And I think that's, again, like Lindsay said, that's a misconception that we have if we're younger about older folks. And the data is supporting exactly what Lindsay's saying, which is that desire actually does not change across the lifespan.
Yeah, what I actually find is that as we get older, what actually happens is a few different things. One is there are just many more contexts in life that sort of affect desire. So it's like, you know, when we're young and we're in our 20s and maybe we're in college, like we don't have a lot of factors that affect our ability to like move through to sexuality, right? It's like maybe I have to go to classes, but then as we get older, like we have our careers and we're pursuing the things that we want and desire. Maybe we get married and we have partnerships, and then we have children, and then we have a house that we own, and then we have, you know, older parents that maybe need things from us. So like what happens as we age is like all these contexts come into play that actually affect our ability to sort of move through into sexuality. But it isn't actually about desire, it's about there are more factors coming into play. And one of the other factors that I see come into play around this as well is how our bodies function. So, you know, as we age, our bodies shift and change. So like one of the stats that I will often share for men in particular is that like by the age of 40, most men are going to start to have the occasional difficulty maintaining an erection. And then what can happen with that is, because if you're familiar with, and actually a lot of people don't really know this, but just kind of how sexuality works for men, is like there's an ebb and flow to erection itself. And so sometimes when men have that ebb, they start to like panic and they think maybe I'm not going to be able to maintain my erection. And then we start to have difficulty with actually maintaining erection occasionally after the age of 40. And then for like women, what will happen as we start to go through sort of like menopause and those types of things as we're approaching like our mid 40s and our 50s and beyond is that thinning of the vaginal walls. So sex might be more painful than it was before, you know, lubrication issues and concerns. And so it's like our bodies don't quite function the ways that we hope and want to, but like our desire for sexual connection actually doesn't like shift or change. Anything you would add to that, Sam, or things that you notice with your clients around sort of the aging process and bodies?
I would just say, if you think about this from the perspective of someone who hasn't been through it themselves yet, imagine you have just as high sexual desire as you have now as a younger person, and then you feel like, okay, well, my body is making it a little bit more difficult for me to actualize that, and sort of the frustration that you might feel in that case. And so that is what can be seen with sexuality and aging, is like desire is not decreasing, but like there could be frustrations around like my body's not doing exactly what I want exactly all the time. And that's where some of the strategies Lindsay's going to talk about come into play.
Yeah, one of the things that I talk about is like just how we define sexuality. So many of us define sexuality as actual penetrative intercourse. And I think one of the things that's important for all ages, but especially as we get older, is like sort of how we define and think about this. And so one of the things, there's actually two things that I'll share really quickly, and I wish I could go more into these actual models that I use in my practice. But the first one I'm going to talk about is just dimensions of touch. So this is actually by Barry McCarthy, who is a sexuality therapist in the sex therapy world. And he just talks about the different dimensions of touch. And all of these are actually sexuality, even though oftentimes we only think of the fifth, which is intercourse, as sex itself. So you have like your affectionate touch, which is like that hand holding and like that closeness and pet kisses. You have sensual touch, which is like making out and snuggling and cuddling and spooning and all of these sorts of things. And then you have playful touch, which I think is a really hard one for people to define. But like when we were talking about BDSM and kink, this is kind of where that one falls into place. But my favorite vanilla example of playful touch is I had a couple that like they're up at a cabin up north, right? And they're like running around naked and they're playful and like hitting each other with towels and all of these sorts of things. So that is also playful touch. And I think sometimes people get caught up in like playful touch must mean I am into a kink, not necessarily. That is by far my like favorite example of playful. And then you have erotic touch, which is manual and oral stimulation and intercourse, right? And so like two of those are really focused on sort of like what our bodies can do or not do. And so what you see is that the definition of sexuality might just change a little bit. It might actually be more about those first three, and it might be more planning for like when erotic and intercourse touch happens. One example that I have is I had a couple that was like in their mid-70s, right? And like she had had some lubrication issues, and she also had some thinning of the vaginal walls. So like it took a lot of work for sex to be pleasurable. And on his end, there was also maybe difficulty maintaining erection and things like this. So it becomes like more of a production. Like they had to put a whole day aside when they wanted to have intercourse sex, right? But they had tons and tons of like sensual and affectionate. And like if you would talk to them, they would say they were very fulfilled with those other dimensions. And then they would plan for this kind of all-day production to actually have intercourse touch. And so that is one factor as well. And I realize that we want to make sure we get to the research and stuff, and this is going quickly, as Sam and I knew it would. But I also wanted to touch on one more thing, and then I'm going to move over to Sam to talk about the research, and then we'll move into some Enneagram stuff. So the other thing that I wanted to touch on is I use the 4D model in my work, which was created by Gina Ogden. And I think why I want to also touch on this is that sexuality is not just our physical story. So the way that she will talk about sex is it's more of like a wheel, and then you have 4 quadrants in the wheel. And our emotional story, our mental story, our spiritual story, and our physical story actually make up what sexuality is. And I think even like when Sam talks about ecstatic sex, right, that really is that spiritual story around sexuality, and like just how important it is really to have all 4 of those quadrants balanced. And I could go a whole hour on this one, but I want to make sure that we also get to some of that research stuff and that we talk a little bit about Enneagram types. So I will move it over to Sam to start talking about that.
I always learn so much from you when you're just sharing your knowledge from sex therapy, and it's always amazing. Thank you so much. I want to add 2 things before we get into the Enneagram stuff. One is a tiny side rant about heteronormativity. So something that we've talked about offline is this idea that like penis and vagina sex is the only sex comes from, you know, heteronormativity, meaning the idea that men and women couples are the only couples, or penis and vagina is the only type of sex you can have. So we see in queer communities, it's a much more broad definition of sex that has more of these elements included. And that I think, you know, folks can really take a cue from that community because as far as I know, there's sort of like less distress in that community with aging because the definition of sex started much more broadly. So I think we can learn something from that. And then the other thing I want to talk about in terms of like practical approaches to sort of handling that frustration that we talked about, and Lindsay started talking about some around, you know, expanding the definition of sex. But also what I would recommend is to go with your energy, to go with the flow of your energy. So the more you're adding expectations on yourself, like, well, we're supposed to be having sex, we're supposed to be having intercourse, that's when you're going to see more of these performance issues because we have anxiety added. We're putting pressure on our bodies to perform when they don't have the energy to do that. Meanwhile, if you can go with, okay, like my desire is waxing, it doesn't matter how long it has been since the last time we had intercourse or the last time we had sexual touch, but it has to do with when I'm really having desire, that's when you're going to have your body more cooperating. So that alone can help with, you know, with functioning if you follow the flow of your energy rather than try to achieve some kind of regular sex that you think you're supposed to be having.
And I think it's interesting when you say that, Sam, because like one of the things that I actually tell my clients in my office is that you shouldn't be having having sex unless you are a definite yes or you're neutral. And that when you do have sex, when you are a no or I'm not interested, you actually create these like really unhealthy cycles and systems around sexuality, that resentment builds, and then your body can actually even have physical reactions. So I'm really glad that you touched on that in particular as well.
That makes me think of, and I don't want to rant too long, last thing, but that makes me think of one of the questions we received at the IEA conference for our sexuality panel, which was a postmenopausal woman who was like, well, how can I, sort of make my body work to have lots of sex like very often? And it was implied strongly in the question that it was her partner that was wanting that. And that was a hard one to answer because we didn't want to support that notion that you should just be making yourself into something that doesn't actually feel right to you. So of course we have like, you can add lubrication, you can, do all these things, but it really is important to tune in and to have sex, any kind of sex, all of these dimensions, when you are really feeling it. And that's going to help a lot.
I want to add to, which I forgot to mention too, is like it is really important as you age too that you sort of have like your team of medical professionals around you too. So like it's not uncommon to like have the OBGYN that specializes in sexuality issues, especially finding someone that specializes in menopause, because a lot of people don't. And the same thing for men, right? Like finding doctors that really specialize in aging and sexuality. And that, oftentimes it is working together with a medical professional, your sex therapist and your acupuncturist and your physical therapist. Like I just mentioned, 4 different types of medical professions that are really helpful and essential sort of in the aging process as well.
Okay, so that was like all background and intro basically. So let's get into the Enneagram and sex and aging. So I just have a little bit of data because again, my study wasn't about aging, but I just pulled some data for this. So what I think is interesting is, like I said at the beginning, older people in the study and younger people in the study aren't reporting any differences in desire at all. They're identical desire levels. But when I looked at instinct, so I broke it down by instinct in both younger people and older people. And the younger folks in the study, which I defined as under 50, the self-preservation dominant people and the social dominant people had the same desire level. And then the sexual dominant people, it was way higher than both of those, very statistically significantly higher. And the older people, self-preservation dominant actually had higher desire than the social dominance by, sort of a notable amount. So I think we'll do some speculating after this on maybe why that could be. So in the older people, social had the lowest desire, then self-preservation, and sexual was still the highest, but the gap was closing. Like sexual wasn't desire way, way higher than self-preservation, and social, it was higher, but just by a small amount. So as a trend, I guess what we're seeing is that the gap is sort of closing over time. When the sexual dominants are younger, they're like desires way up here, but by the time they age, it's down a little bit. Self-preservation's up a little bit. We can speculate on that, and it's getting a little bit closer. And then we also see the social is now at the bottom when it was equal with self-preservation before. So, Lindsay, do you have any ideas on why some of this might be?
Some of it makes sense to me. I mean, well, one thing I was thinking too is like, well, self-preservation are all about the pleasure around sex. So I can see that sort of like there will still be a desire and want sort of for the orgasm or the actual experience of sex. And I guess as social just stay baseline the whole time. They actually probably aren't changing. It's just the other two are changing, so they shift with that. What's interesting to me, like when you talk about like in my office in particular, like I will see that sexual instinct dominant people struggle the most sort of with the aging process and the desirability and sort of those types of things, like having more like fear that like I'm going to like lose sexual function completely and those types of things, where like actually social are the least to worry about that. And I do see now that you've said that, I actually do see self-preservation people worry a little bit about that as well. So it does seem to follow sort of what I am seeing in my office as well, as us socials in the middle. It's all about the bonding and connection, and so that's still going to happen if you're younger, if you're older, right? And so it makes complete sense to me that would sort of happen, and that we maybe start at the same place as self-preservation as a social myself, but then self-preservation might focus on that more as they age because of it makes sense, just the functioning of the body.
Another thing I'm thinking about with self-preservation dominance is we know that they are the most affected by context of any of the other instincts, meaning the more stuff there is to worry about around house, kids, finances, the less interested in sex they are, not because they don't have desire present, but because those contexts sort of, they have to move through all of that before they can get to actualizing desire. And I was just thinking after, 55, etc., 60, like if you have kids, they're probably out of the house. You might be downsizing, and actually self-preservation people are going to have less to worry about maybe. And that could be a reason we're seeing a little bit of an increase in their desire levels when they're older. It's just because the context is improving. We had a comment, did you look if there's a change around 40? I didn't. I just pulled this data right before this, but I can look at that. So one of the things with my study is it was mostly people in their 30s. Is a huge spread, but the average was 30s. So to look on over 40 and under 40 was a little tricky because there wasn't enough people under 40, but I could take a look at that as well. In this case, I looked over 50, under 50.
Yeah.
Lindsay, what other sort of Enneagram insights do you have around aging?
Well, I think too, if we go type related, right? Like we're gonna see, like our type 3s also maybe struggle a little bit more because they want to be impressive or successful around sexuality, whatever that kind of means for them. And so there can be a little bit more of like internal struggle or conflict if I can't perform the way that I want to because my body isn't functioning the way that it used to. And so I will see that in particular with 3, or maybe just people that are more image focused in general would have a little bit more difficulty with that. I also notice with type 6s in particular as they age, they can, depending on the 6, of course, but there can be some like worst case scenario type worrying. I'm thinking of a 6 that I had in my office, and like this just idea of like sexuality is going to end and my body's not going to function, and now I'm having, I might have had that, I have difficulty maintaining an erection, and like it'll be gone forever, all of those type of things as well. And so there can be more like worry about sexual performance for 6s, and the more that they worry about it, the less that they're able to perform the ways that they want to. And this one in particular I'm thinking of was a self-preservation sexual instinct dominant who is in their 60s. So yeah, and I think that I've seen that with other 6s as well, and just even as they're approaching 40 or 50 too, having worry about that. Like like women, am I not going to have desire after I go through menopause, for instance?
Because 6s are worriers, we know. And also I want to add about 3s is you can see them actually avoiding sex because of their anxiety that they won't be the best. And you can see that 3s of all ages, anytime there's anxiety around performance, they can actually end up subtly avoiding sex, even if it's subconscious. So I think, as they age, you can see that as well. If they're worried about their performance, they might be, shutting down a little bit to intimacy. Another thing with type is when we look at 4s, 7s, and 8s, which I've talked a lot about with my study, they're the highest desire 3 types. And someone from the IEA conference started calling them the sexual triad at my presentation. I love that. So the sexual triad, they are pushing through more of these difficulties more. So, we're not seeing as much of like a drop off in sexual behavior in those 3 types as we are in some of the other types. Again, not that desire is dropping off, but 4s, 7s, and 8s seem to be a little more persistent in actualizing their desire even when they're older and there's these barriers. Do you have anything to add, Lindsay, about that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think it's really interesting because, like, even if we go with the withdrawal types, which are the, 5, 4, and oh God, I'm like having a blank. 9. Myself, yes, myself. I can't remember myself. I feel like 5 and 9, it might be like more difficult, especially if depending on, again, 5's and sexual instinct dominant might be a little bit different. But 5s and 9s might be a little bit harder to push through, like needing the energy and the capacity. But guess what? 4s, nope, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what age clients I have in my office that is a 4. They are still high desire and oftentimes engaging in a lot of sexual activity still, even at 55, 60, 65. Tell me your tricks because I want to know. So I can tell clients.
Yeah, I was meeting some older type 4s recently at the IEA conference that were, especially this one in particular that was postmenopausal woman who's like poly, multiple partners, kink, like living her best sexual life all over the place. So I'm like, that's like so amazing for you. But what's actually interesting, this is probably a different topic for another live, is that she was then like afraid to necessarily talk about that to everyone because she felt like people judge sexual older women, which that does happen. So that's a whole nother aspect of this.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I feel like we could go a whole Sexy First Friday on some of the ageism around sexuality, and especially for women in particular, more than men.
So let's look at this comment, and then we'll have to wrap up. So the comment is, with 7s, there's a superiority inferiority factor at play with fulfilling desire, like as much as gluttony. What are your thoughts on that?
I'd say I agree completely with that statement.
Yeah, what's interesting about 4s, 7s, and 8s is they're all, the high desire types, but they're motivated all by 3 different reasons for having high desire. So I think that's also another live, but I think that's pretty interesting and relevant to that comment. Okay, so last?
Oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, what a great comment, because it's very showing of like the 7 in particular.
Any last things you want to share about sexuality and aging before we talk about our exciting news?
I don't think so. I just think that, I knew we'd only be able to touch on it. There's so much more information and things to look at around this, but just like my biggest thing around it is that we are sexual beings from the day we're born to the day we die. And just remembering that, yes, your grandparents do want to have sex, and we do hope that they're having a very vibrant sexual life.
Diet Smoking Coke says news.
News? We do have news.
News. So we're super excited about this. We are going to be starting a Sexy First Fridays monthly chat. In addition to this, don't worry, this isn't going away. So we'll have Sexy First Friday on the first Friday, and then we're going to have Sexy Fridays monthly chat on the third Friday of the month. And we'll start that in September. And that's going to be a drop-in group on Zoom where we'll basically do what we're doing here, but it's a conversation. So professionals, lay people, whoever's interested in this topic can attend, and we'll have a conversation, loosely based around the same topic that we cover for Sexy First Friday, but it can go spontaneously wherever, we want it to. And we will do a optional donation. So it can be free if that's what you can afford, but if you want to give us 10 or 15 bucks, we will give our Venmo. And we're excited to be talking with you directly about all of these things and answering your questions. Anything you want to add, Lindsay, about that?
I'm just actually really excited to be doing this so that people can have a little bit more access. I know that these 30 minutes go really fast, and I know you and I are really looking forward to that. And then I guess I suppose we should talk about like what's going to happen next month, because I am going to be in South Carolina with the family, which I am excited to. We shouldn't call it vacation. We should call it a family trip. I'm going on a family trip to South Carolina with my family, and I will actually not be here on September first. But that being said, we have a special guest that's going to join us, and I'll have Sam. She's actually a very good friend of ours. We're excited to have her, and I'll have Sam share a little bit about who's going to be joining for September. Though I will be at the Sexy Chat on the third Friday in September.
Okay, Diet Soak and Coke says, all leading up to your podcast release. Find someone to sponsor our podcast and we will do one. I promise. We need a sponsor. Yes, so for September, we're going to have should it be a surprise guest or should I say who it is? We're going to have, I'll say who it is. We're going to have Nian from Evolving Enneagram, and we're going to be focusing on the spiritual aspects of sex that Lindsay alluded to earlier in the 4 quadrants. One of my specialties and special interests is ecstatic sex, spiritual sex, transcendent sex. So I'll be talking about that with Nian, who's a spirituality expert, and that'll be on September 1st, the usual time. So look out for announcements about that and about Sexy Fridays monthly chat. It'll be the same time that we do this. So I hope you guys can come to that as well, and we'll send out more information. I'll also remind you guys about it in September.
And then I will be back in October for our Sexy First Fridays as well. So I'll just be missing one, but I know Nian will be a great addition to our Sexy First Fridays for the month that I have to miss. And this went really fast again. Yes, the travel with kids, the trip travel with just the spouse, the vacation. Exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much for everybody that's joined us. I really loved seeing all of the comments, and we look forward to seeing you. Well, Nian and Sam look forward to seeing you next month, and then I will see you on the 3rd Friday for our first Sexy Chat. Have a great Friday. Take care. Bye, Sam.
Bye, Lindsay. Bye, everybody.